Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Aniagulu. Now, many African countries are currently either under lockdown or in some form of restriction as the coronavirus tightens its grip. The continent is now in the state that China was in January when Hubei province went into lockdown. But as life is returning to normal in China and the COVID-19 lockdown there is lifted, Africans are now speaking of a worrying trend, saying that they are coming under attack in China. According to community leaders, hundreds of Africans are unable to go home after being evicted from their homes and hotels over fears the coronavirus was spreading in African communities. Videos have been trending online showing African nationals on the streets.
I have to express our profound gratitude to the ambassador of China here in Nigeria. He acted immediately and reached the most important elements in the Chinese government hierarchy. The reaction of the government has been very, very quick, and so they're now working together as a team. It's unfortunate that the government in Guangdong did not reach out early enough to our authorities, consulates in Guangdong and Shanghai and Beijing.
There is nothing whatsoever changed in China's policy of friendship towards Africa. We are fully committed to our strategic partnership with Nigeria. Guangzhou is fighting for the virus. Not any Nigerians, not any Africans, not any foreign nationals, not any Chinese.
That's the Chinese ambassador to Nigeria there, and before him, the Nigerian foreign minister. Well, joining me now from our studios in Lagos, the pioneer secretary and current trustee of the Nigeria-China Association, Professor Bola Akinterinwa, who's also a former director general of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs. Thank you very much indeed, Professor, for joining us. You're in a better position than most to make an assessment of what is going on in China as far as Nigerians are concerned and Africans are concerned. What do you make of all that you're seeing and hearing in the news?
Your question simply reminds me of one French saying, when they say unbelievable but true. Unbelievable for some, true for some others. When evaluating the situational reality on the ground, one will see that the arguments, the explanations given by the Chinese ambassador to Nigeria, they are very valid arguments. Now, we know quite well that what happened actually, what we have been told, what we have been able to see, we'll discover that, look, there are some elements of truth, and there are also some elements of untruth. There are many versions of the truth, but we don't know whose version we should stick to. And I would say that the way the explanation has been given is a little bit difficult to agree with. And it is also not difficult to agree with. It all depends on what we are trying to consider. If you remember that, look, the relationship between Nigeria and China is predicated on a pentagon of principles, as distinct from the Chinese policy on Africa. There's no way one will not agree with the Chinese ambassador, for instance, in the sense that, okay, the Chinese will tell you they have zero tolerance for racism, all right? They have zero tolerance for discrimination. And when you look at the role of China, especially right from the signing of the 1955 Bandung Conference on peaceful coexistence, you will know that to a great extent, the Chinese have been living up to expectation, promoting good neighborliness, promoting closer ties with African countries. But when you take a look again at what transpired in Guangzhou and the position of the government, when you take a closer look at the video that has been going viral worldwide, you will now ask the question, could it be true? All right. So it makes an evaluation of the situation very, very difficult to know on which path to toe on this particular matter. So in terms of evaluation, as it is, I think it raises more questions than answers for now.
That's a very good point, and that's, I think, a very objective way of assessing it. You, of course, have the privilege of being reasonably close to Chinese officials in Nigeria, and arguably those in China as well, because, of course, you were the pioneer secretary of the Nigeria-China Friendship Association, and you are still a trustee of that association. I just wondered if you've questioned Chinese officials about why this sort of action is being alleged against them, and if so, what reasons they're giving for being apparently so horrible to Africans, if I can say that.
Well, your question is quite interesting from many perspectives. The issue is that I made an attempt, I tried to speak with a friend in the embassy to find out the truth, at least their own version of the truth. And I was told that the embassy, that was about 2-3 days ago, the embassy was not yet in true picture of what actually transpired, and that when the information is available, I will be told. So in this case, I've not had any official presentation of the facts as they exist beyond the public statements made by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Nigeria and the Chinese ambassador. But the issue is that relationship between Nigeria and China must always be seen at two different complementary levels. They are different in the sense that we have government to government, but we also have people to people. And that is where the Nigeria-China Friendship Association, NICAF, which was established by the late Ambassador Shibundu, comes in. We try to take advantage of people-to-people relationship to enhance, to contribute to the efforts being made at the governmental level. Now, when we try to draw attention to this, most unfortunately, at the government-to-government level, I do not always share the position of government on both sides. The issue is that at the level of the government of Nigeria, because our foreign policy is necessarily reactive, it's never programmatic. There is no policy, for instance, at the level of Nigeria, articulating how Nigerians should be protected when there is a crisis. We don't have any foreign policy protection of Nigerians abroad, apart from the case of the diplomats and the diplomatists who are supposed to be protected on the basis of the 1961 diplomatic convention, Convention on Diplomatic Relations, as well as the 1963 Vienna Convention, on consular relations. Apart from that, under normal circumstances, at the level of private international law, Nigerians are supposed to be protected. And the protection is to the extent that when there is denial of justice and the victim, the individual, has the nationality of Nigeria, Nigeria owes it a responsibility to protect. But we don't have that. So what is happening at the level of the Chinese is this. When the government tells us, for instance, that Nigerians have not complied with the Chinese law, agreed, no country will allow any foreigner to bastardize its own security system, its own immigration law, etc. But the issue is not being addressed. The issue is not being addressed. We are talking about rationalizations. There is the need to make a fundamental difference between people and issues involved. By the time you are talking about people, the factor of sympathy or not having sympathy will be brought in. Right. The issue is not having sympathy. But when you talk about issues, you are necessarily raising the rightness, the wrongness of action, of policy action, of government. The question I ask in this particular case is this. By the time the Nigerians might have offended the Chinese law, regulation, and they are now, forced out of their rooms, the question that we ask at the level of people-to-people relationship is this. When they are forced out, they are ejected from their houses. To go where? To be on the streets? No, this one is not helpful for us as NICAF, Nigeria-China Friendship Association. It's not. I simply remember, for instance, when the Chinese was kidnapped in Ondo State. By that time, I was still Director General of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs. I took the burden immediately to call the Commissioner of Police in Ondo State, which is also my state, and draw the attention to the implications that, look, the Chinese are close friends. They are economically very active in Nigeria. This is what they are doing. So they should ensure that, prompt action is taken. The Commissioner of Police was very happy that we are looking at it patriotically. And the Chinese, in fact, within 72 hours, we were happy. We were told that they've been released. And I drew the attention of the then Consul General to it. So if we do this at the level of Nigeria.
Right, okay. So, I'm just going to, I don't mean to interrupt you there, Professor Akinterinwa, but we will come back to you in in a short moment. We've got to take a break and we'll continue talking. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat about tensions that are running high in China over Africans and coronavirus rumors. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Enyegolu. A backlash against Africans in China as the country eases lockdown measures for COVID-19. African business persons and students are talking of coming under attack and being forced into another stint of quarantine. In Guangdong, where this is apparently taking place, the provincial government has responded to allegations of discrimination, saying it attaches great importance to the concerns of some African countries and is working promptly to improve its way of operating. But in Guangzhou, many are concerned over the treatment of Africans. Some Nigerian students have alleged that they've been evicted from their homes, arrested and forced into quarantine. Well, with me still in the studio from Lagos is the distinguished guest that we have with us today, and that is, of course, Professor Bola Akinterinwa, who is also a former Director General of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, but was the pioneer secretary and current trustee of the Nigeria-China Association. Thank you very much indeed for staying with us. Let me ask you this, because you raised some very interesting points before we went on a break. Do you think that there is, of course, a lot of feeling, particularly in the West and in Western-influenced countries, that China is a very propagandist country? Do you think that the Chinese government has convinced Chinese people that COVID-19 is a foreign virus brought in by foreigners, when in fact the evidence is clear that it originated in China?
Well, you see, this issue of COVID-19 appears to me to be an opportunity, all right, to showcase the emerging Cold War between the United States and the Chinese. The case reminds me of one Professor Baptiste Durozel in France, who theorized, is a diplomatic historian, that tout empire périra, that is, every empire shall perish. Meaning now that in the context of the Chinese thinking, the Chinese believe that, look, the time of American leadership of the world, all right, has come and is about to go and should go. The Chinese are already prepared, all right, for the leadership of the world. But the Americans themselves do not want to agree with that type of analytical disposition. If you look at the foreign policy principle, you know, under Donald Trump, that says, look, America should be great again. All right? He came up with that one to say, we should make America great. Meaning now that the Americans are preparing, you know, to sustain their leadership of the world. So, in this case, since there is this political rivalry, leadership rivalry, then if you now factor in propaganda, you cannot rule it out. So you should expect the Americans to give accusation, levy accusation against the Chinese, and the Chinese also to provide countermeasures. The Chinese, for instance, are now saying, look, they have zero tolerance for discrimination, racism, and so on and so forth. The Americans are accusing the Chinese of racism. So, in this particular case, we need to factor, all right, into the discussion the issues being raised. Now, for instance, when we are explaining this issue of racism, there may be justification, there may not be justification. But on the basis of Nigerian people relating with the Chinese people, my position is that if the Nigerians have committed any offense whatsoever, my position is that the Chinese should have considered the Pentagon of principles guiding bilateral ties between the two countries, and as a result, give exceptional treatment to the people of Nigeria, not to the whole of Africa, to the people of Nigeria. For instance, let me give you an idea of what I call this Pentagon of principles. The Chinese consider themselves as the biggest country in the third world. Is the biggest third world country. Nigeria is the biggest, you know, African country. In this case, the biggest country in Africa. So, factor of being big. The Chinese also have the biggest population in the world. Nigeria also has the biggest population in Africa. The third one is also that, you know, Nigeria has the policy of Africa being the cornerstone and the centerpiece. The Chinese are also factoring using Africa as the major platform of their foreign policy. In 2050, for instance, all right, the population of the Chinese is expected to, quote and unquote, to explode, and they will need to have shelter outside of China. And Africa certainly is a good place being considered. And that's why the Chinese have been nurturing very good relationship with the African people. Let me remind you, Charles, a total number of about 53 countries then, before it became 54, could not afford to construct a secretariat for the African Union. it took the Chinese to offer to construct a befitting secretariat for the African Union at a cost of about 30 million US dollars. And the Chinese offer, yes, the Chinese also gave 10 million additional sum for its maintenance.
Right, I understand all that, Professor
Akinterinwa.
Sorry to interrupt you. I understand all that, but I just want to return to the original premise of my question, which was that do you think that the Chinese government has convinced Chinese people that COVID-19 is a foreign virus brought in by foreigners? In other words, trying to deflect attention from the fact that it actually originated in China in other words, from the populace of China. The reason I ask you that is that we've seen videos, I've certainly seen videos, and I've talked to people I know who are not African, who are in China and who have friends in China. I've seen videos on social media suggesting that this type of treatment that Africans are getting is not limited to people of African descent, but has also been meted out to foreigners in general, including Europeans, Americans, Indians, and others. I mean, I'm just wondering if you have heard of the ill treatment of people of other races, and even if you haven't, what you make of it in the context of what the issue, the points I was just making.
Charles, I heard you very, very well, and I was coming to that aspect. I was only giving you some factors that, look, attitudinally, why the Chinese are more interested in having good relationship with Africa, and then use that one to explain the fact of this accusation of racism and holding some Africans responsible as the main vectors. I heard you, I was coming to that. But let me give you the direct answer to that particular one. The issue is this. Based on the different videos, I had the opportunity of looking at some of the videos. I have asked myself to say, could the Chinese people behave like this? And I differentiated between the position of the government in Beijing as distinct from the people to people. I think that the holding Africans responsible as the main vector, as the main source, as the bearer, the carriers of COVID-19 to China is most unfortunate. Most unfortunate because if you look at the book published by Gunitz in 1981, all right, they talked about the virus. The name was Wuhan 400. And the characteristics identified as of today, the features of COVID-19 as of today, they reflect precisely what was put in the book. You know, the book was published in 1981, and it clearly stated that by 2020, we will have this type of virus. So it took place in China. So for anyone now to want to hold Africans responsible in 2020, that one cannot hold. In 2010, this issue of COVID-19, as it is renamed, was raised. In 2015, it was also raised. Bill Gates mentioned it, but did not refer directly to corona. But the prescriptions, the descriptions, the features given, they clearly reflect what is happening today. So under no circumstance can anybody rightly posit that Africans are responsible. So if anybody is now saying Africans are responsible, who are those saying so? Is it the government of China or the people?
Well, that will have to be question for another day, but it's been absolutely brilliant talking with you. Professor Bola Akinterinwa, who is, of course, the pioneer secretary of the China-Nigeria, or rather Nigeria-China Friendship Association, and a current trustee of that association. Thank you very much indeed. And you're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead, including we assess global progress towards a coronavirus vaccine. Stay with us.